What's up, everyone? Tara Roberts here with 444, and we are talking waiver wire ads that you can actually use because it is week 17. We're not adding anyone for the sake of depth. We want actual usable pieces you can plug into your starting lineup right now. And I've got players readily available on waivers for you to snatch up and ride the wave to victory. Before we get started, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel. And if you want more fantasy insights and tips, head over to 444.com/plans and sign up for a subscription today. And exclusively for our YouTube audience, use promo code YouTube at checkout to save 25%. Now let's go ahead and dive right in. First up, Demarcus Robinson. I got some pushback on my waiver wire video last week for recommending Demarcus Robinson. I get it. It's not as if Robinson is a guy like Rashid Shaheed, a young player with unknown potential. Robinson is 29 and has spent the vast majority of his career with elite quarterbacks. There is no confusing that he has some kind of untapped potential here. When he is given the opportunity, he does tend to hit. And boy, has he hit in 2023. He has been on a 4-week tear with a touchdown in each of the last 4 games and a minimum of 13 fantasy points. This week he gets the Giants, a fairly average pass defense that Matt Stafford should be able to handle with ease. As long as Matt Stafford is playing at a high level and the Rams offense is thriving, Robinson is a flex option. Moving on to the next player, it is KJ Osborn. Both TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison went down with injuries in week 16. We now know that Hawkinson's injury is a season-ending injury. Addison's injury was originally described as week to week, and now it's day to day. KJ Osborn might be the single most usable player on waivers right now. In 2022, Osborn closed out the season when called upon over a 5-game span and had 3 touchdowns in 4 games with a minimum of 14 fantasy points, including one spectacular 10-reception game for 157 receiving yards. And that type of performance is actually well within the realm of possibility this week because the Vikings face the Green Bay Packers. Packers just allowed Bryce Young's first 300 passing yard game. This is an excellent matchup, and he is potentially the second or third option this week. Moving on to the next player, it is Nick Mullens. Since we talked about KJ Osborn, why not talk about the guy that is throwing him the ball? This is an absolute smash start for Nick Mullens. I rarely use that type of language in terms of a streaming option, let alone for a guy that just became the starter and objectively did look terrible last week. But let me re-emphasize, Green Bay's secondary is in complete disarray. Jair Alexander returned last week and it didn't really do a thing. They're just struggling. And what makes Mullen a very appealing option here is that despite the fact that he has thrown more interceptions than touchdowns this season, he has thrown very strong volume. In both of his starts, he has exceeded 300 passing yards and has had 2 touchdowns in each of them. He's had enough attempts and completions to really overcome those turnovers. And since there's obviously some delay between filming this video versus when you watch the video, I'll even go as far to say this. If Minnesota ends up being really irritated with last week's performance and Mullens ends up getting benched and they say, we got to bench this guy, we got to go back to Josh Dobbs, I would absolutely recommend starting Dobbs against Green Bay. Dobbs would have true top 5 potential in this matchup because of the likelihood of him running all over Green Bay, plus the issues with the secondary. And if they even decided to turn to Jaren Hall, which I don't think would happen considering that they're still in the playoff hunt, but if they did, I would actually feel even comfortable starting Hall as a QB2 in Superflex. That is how advantageous this matchup is. So provided the Vikings aren't frustrated with Mullens, he is a solid streaming option this week. And moving on to another player, Gerald Everett is a bit higher rostered than the aforementioned guys, but he's still under 50% rostered in both Yahoo and ESPN leagues. Everett has one of the best matchups for tight ends against Denver. Denver is ranked 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. It just makes complete sense that tight ends would skew better against Denver because they're typically the team that has very strong coverage against receivers, so opposing quarterbacks leaning into tight ends, it just makes sense. Everett has had between 8 and 14 fantasy points in each game for the past 5 weeks. His targets have also increased to 8 in each game over the past 3 weeks. The absence of Donald Parham does have a lot to do with that. Parham has missed the last 2 games, and his Week 16 absent was listed as coach's decision. Very interesting. It's also worth noting that Easton Stick hasn't been terrible, so the quarterback situation shouldn't deter you from rolling out Everett. And let's do one more option. Streaming defenses is actually kind of easy this week. There's a ton of options. There's steady guarantees in a team like Houston, where we saw that matchup recently, but you could also take a high upside swing and go with the Las Vegas Raiders. Perception has really been holding down the Raiders defense here in terms of fantasy. They're a completely different team under Antonio Pierce. They are generating turnovers at a rapid rate. They are scoring defensive touchdowns. They are getting plenty of stacks, forcing fumbles, you name it, they are doing it. And this week they face Indianapolis, a team that has been vulnerable to turnovers. We aren't chasing points here, because aside from the 1-0 point outing against Kansas City in week 12, the Raiders have had a minimum of 9 fantasy points in every single game since week 8. They're a very strong plug and play option here. And that wraps things up. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you want more fantasy insights and tips, head over to 4for4.com/plans and sign up for a subscription today. And exclusively for our YouTube audience, use promo code YouTube at checkout to save 25%.